Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining SGI's online event. My name is GS Nara. I'm a Director of Disarmament and Human Rights at SGI. I'm very honored to moderate today's session. This event was organized out of a profound sense of urgency regarding the current global nuclear situation. Amidst ongoing international conflict, including in Ukraine and the Middle East and elsewhere, the risks of nuclear use and proliferation have reached unprecedented level. Furthermore, in response to the rapidly changing security environment, we are seeing a resurgence of debate around the nuclear sharing and the nuclear possession in part of Europe and then even here in Japan. This is a critical issue that could undermine the international frameworks maintained since World War II, and the challenge it would challenge Japan's long-standing position as the only country to have suffered atomic bombing in war and as a leader of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. In such time, it is vital that we face reality head-on and engage in fact-based discussion rather than emotional rhetoric. Today's event, with a capacity of 500 participants, was fully booked within just one day. This is a clear testament to your high level of concern and a serious commitment to this issue. I am deeply grateful to have this opportunity to learn and deepen our discussion with all of you who share this common purpose. To address the current nuclear crisis, we must prioritize disarmament education. This is the most effective way to expose the risks of these weapons and protect the future of coming generations. I hope today's session helps us to look past rhetoric, understand the future threat, and move toward concrete action. We are very pleased that James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Study at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, CNS, and the Toda Peace Institute join us as co-organizers today. I'd like to invite representatives from both organizers to share welcome remarks. First, I'd like to invite Dr. Stein Tonnesson, Director of the Toda Peace Institute.
Thank you very much. My name is Stein Tonnesson, as you said, and since the 1st of January, I have been director of the Toda Peace Institute, succeeding Kevin Clements, who is now an honorary director and a distinguished fellow at the Institute. I would like to thank the SGI Office and Global State Issues and plus the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies for having invited the Toda Peace Institute to be the third convener of this important event. At the Toda Peace Institute, we are developing now under Kevin Clements' leadership a project on no first use policy, the risk of first use and non-proliferation in Northeast Asia. So this is all very, very relevant to us. I would take that chance to welcome you all, and particularly the speakers, Pan, Yanliang, and Sverre Lodgaard. Sverre Lodgaard and I are compatriots living in the same city of Oslo, and 35 to 38 years ago, he was my boss when he was director at the Peace Research Institute Oslo, where I'm based. Finally, I will just underline what Chie Sunada already said, that in the current situation in the world, with nuclear powers being actively engaged in horrendous warfare, it's extremely urgent to address the issues that we are talking about here and to base our discussion on risk on historical events and risk crises of the past. History is as important as ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Stein. Next is Masako Toki. She is a senior project manager and a research associate at CNS.
Thank you so much, Jae-san, for your kind introduction. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Masako Taki, Senior Project Manager for the Nonproliferation Education Program at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, here in California. It is a great pleasure for us to collaborate with the Soka Gakkai Peace Committee and the Toda Peace Institute to present today's forum, Nuclear Close Calls, Moments when the World Came Close to Nuclear War. At our center, our mission is to combat the spread of weapons of mass destruction through research, education, and training. A key part of that mission is promoting nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation education, especially for younger generations. We are deeply grateful for our partnership with the Soka Gakkai International and the Toda Peace Institute as we share a common goal, advancing peace and security, and working toward a world free of nuclear weapons for the benefit of all humanity. At a time when global nuclear risks are once again increasing, education on these issues is more important than ever. While nuclear weapons are often discussed in terms of strategy or nuclear deterrence, history reminds us that the world has come dangerously close to nuclear war. Sometimes these moments were even closer than we might imagine due to miscommunication, technical errors, or misinterpretations. Learning about these historical close calls is an important educational tool for reducing nuclear risks and promoting disarmament. When students explore these events, they often begin to see more clearly the fragility of nuclear deterrence and the importance of continued efforts to reduce nuclear dangers. At CNS, we are also exploring new ways to make these lessons more accessible, particularly for students and younger audiences. One example is the development of graphic stories led by our colleague, Mr. Yanliang Pan, who will present today. These initiatives are part of our center's broader educational efforts. In my work, I have the privilege of working with high school students from around the world, including students in both the United States and Japan, through programs such as the Critical Issues Forum, a program that promotes education on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Many of these students realize, for the first time, how real the risks of nuclear weapons remain today. To help guide us through these issues, we are very fortunate to have distinguished speakers with us today, including Dr. Sverre Lodgaard and my colleague, Mr. Yanliang Pan. I hope today's discussion will deepen our understanding of the risks associated with nuclear weapons and highlight the importance of continued education and dialogue as we work toward a world free of nuclear weapons. Thank you again for joining us today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Masako. Now, let me introduce our two distinguished experts who will lead today's discussion. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Yanliang Pan. Yanliang is a research associate at the CNS. His extensive research covers the Russian and Chinese nuclear industries, nuclear fuel cycle, and the intersection of AI with nuclear agenda. He is also the creator of a nuclear close call graphic that will be presented today. Yanliang is joining us from California, where it is currently 3:30 a.m. Thank you very much, Yanliang, for being with us. I'm not sure I should say it's late at night or early morning, but thank you very much for being with us. And the next is, it is my honor to introduce Professor Sverre Lodgaard, who will deliver our keynote speech today. Professor Lodgaard served as the director of Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, NUPI, and remained a senior research fellow there until last year. He is also an honorary senior research fellow at the Toda Peace Institute. At the time of the Norwegian Rocket Incident, he was the director of the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research. He has been at the forefront of arms control for many years, with expertise spanning geopolitics, Iranian foreign policy, and nuclear program of Iran and North Korea. Following the keynote speech, we will have a Q&A session. Please post your question in the chat. Please understand that due to time constraint, we may not be able to address all the questions. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Yanliang to give his presentation on the Norwegian Rocket Incident.
I hope everyone can hear me. It is my pleasure, and I am so grateful to be able to join this event and present our research and our graphic stories on this topic. So the topic of my presentation, the title is Nuclear Close Calls, Illustrating the Likelihood of Nuclear War. Now, because colleagues have introduced the center where I now work as a research associate, I won't go too deep into the details of our work. Suffice it to say that I think the study of nuclear close calls is a very important aspect of our research and our training and education. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the overarching question of why we want to study nuclear close calls at all. These are instances, perhaps decades ago, events that led the world to the verge of nuclear war. But since we're all here today, right, clearly the world has not been destroyed by an inadvertent global nuclear conflict. So why do we care about these previous nuclear close calls? Well, the short answer is that they demonstrate that nuclear deterrence can fail. And the slightly longer answer is that in order to understand any risk, including nuclear risk, we have to look at both the consequences and the likelihood of that bad thing happening. And this is illustrated by the Treaty on the Nonproliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The first substantive paragraph of the preamble to this treaty, to the NPT, right, urges us to consider both the devastating consequences of nuclear weapon use as well as the real danger of nuclear war. Because if the consequences are devastating, but the danger is zero, then we wouldn't have to worry about it, right? Why do we need to stop the spread of nuclear weapons? Because not only are the consequences of nuclear weapon use devastating, but the spread of nuclear weapons will, we think, increase the danger, the likelihood of a nuclear war. Similarly, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, a more recent treaty, highlights both the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapon use as well as the likelihood of a nuclear detonation by accident, miscalculation, or by design. So nuclear risk is the product of both humanitarian consequences associated with nuclear weapon use and the likelihood of nuclear war. And humanitarian consequences, I think, have been the focus of a lot of advocacy and education efforts in the disarmament domain. For example, the humanitarian initiative led by a group of states within the NPT process and now the TPNW process seeks to shift the debate surrounding nuclear weapons from one that is focused on deterrence, on security, on the legality of nuclear weapon use, to one that is associated with the moral implications of nuclear weapon use and possession. A lot of advocacy and education has focused on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapon use there are, of course, very significant, as well as the consequences of nuclear testing at Nevada, Semipalatinsk, many other nuclear test sites around the world. And in that regard, we have partnered with a Japanese museum, the Daigo Fukurimaru Exhibition Hall, to create a graphic story that seeks to reconstruct the events surrounding nuclear testing, specifically the Castle Bravo nuclear test, and the very unfortunate and tragic fallout and contamination after that test, including the contamination of a Japanese fishing vessel. But today I want to talk about the likelihood of nuclear war, because parallel with the humanitarian consequences, we have to actually study the different factors that contribute to the likelihood of an actual nuclear conflict. And in some ways, this is more difficult because these factors are either more technical or more abstract. When we talk about the likelihood of nuclear war, we have to talk about how countries control their nuclear weapons, nuclear command, control, and communication systems, or NC3. We have to talk about escalation theory. How does a conventional conflict escalate to the nuclear level? We have to talk about doctrines and postures, because we have to think about what circumstances might lead a country to use nuclear weapons. That's their military doctrine, their nuclear doctrine. We also have to look at how countries have sought to reduce risk and whether risk reduction itself creates new risks. So unfortunately, all of these things are either classified, opaque, or abstract, right? Obviously, military systems are usually highly classified. Escalation theory and doctrines are abstract, if not absolutely hypothetical. And risk reduction measures, unlike, for example, initiatives like the humanitarian initiative, they are often negotiated behind closed doors between states, between governments, between militaries. So how then do we, let's say, educate the public, or at least make the risks of nuclear war known to the public in a way that breaks down the opacity, the abstractness, that illustrates, right, graphically, the likelihood of nuclear war? Well, we need to do this because we have to challenge the narrative that deterrence works, right? The fact that the factors leading to nuclear war, contributing to the likelihood of nuclear war, are abstract or classified or opaque, that allows nuclear weapon possessors to claim that because states are rational, because mutually assured destruction deters nuclear weapon use, deterrence works, and the likelihood of nuclear war is very low. They are constructing a narrative where even if the consequences of nuclear weapon use are high, because the likelihood is manageable, is low, the risk is low accordingly. Well, we're trying to challenge that narrative by saying that the likelihood actually isn't as low as we might want to imagine, and the risk is even higher. This is a line of argumentation that exists in parallel to the focus on humanitarian consequences, whereas those consequences convince us of the moral illegitimacy of nuclear weapon use and possession. The likelihood argument is much more pragmatic. It's saying that deterrence doesn't reliably work. Well, that then leads us to the story of today, which is a story that happened in January of 1995, when a research rocket was launched off the coast of Norway, carrying scientific instruments to study the northern lights above the Arctic. So since 1962, some 600 research rockets had been launched from this launch site. But this particular rocket that was launched in 1995, called the Black Brant 12, was unusually large. And so naturally, one of Russia's military radars, their early warning radars, picked up the signature of this ascending projectile, which they saw as a missile. Now, at this time, Russia's radars were low resolution. They couldn't see exactly where the rocket was launched from. Of course, the Norwegian Foreign Ministry at this time had notified the diplomatic missions of neighboring countries, including the Russian embassy in Oslo, in this letter that we see here, exactly what kind of rocket would be launched, toward which direction, where it would fall. But for some reason, the Russian radar operators were not notified. And so they thought this might be a submarine-launched ballistic missile carrying nuclear weapons about to hit Russia. Now, there was a coincidence that led to this perception, and that was that the stages of the rocket separated at exactly those moments that one would expect the stages of a nuclear missile to separate. right? Particularly this one missile called the Trident. And so this triggered an automatic alarm from Russia's early warning computers. And so the operators, by operating procedure, had to report the threat up the chain of command. And this report allegedly went all the way to President Yeltsin, who saw the missile through this little black briefcase that the president of Russia, as well as his aides, could use to track a missile, a projectile, and use the buttons to place Russia's nuclear forces on high alert. So a little bit about the geopolitical background at this time. By 1995, the Cold War had ended, but NATO was expanding, and Russia was not pleased. So US-Russian relations had begun to cool off after a honeymoon period right after the end of the Cold War. Russia itself was in trouble because there was a separatist war in the region of Chechnya. However, literally just hours before the Norwegian rocket was launched, President Bill Clinton of the United States applauded, in his State of the Union address, applauded cooperation with Russia in nuclear arms reduction. So US-Russia relations were still amicable, and there was still great trust between the US and Russian leaders. Now, this might have made it seem unlikely that the United States would launch an attack against Russia, but for the early warning radar operators, for the Russian leaders, a threat of a nuclear missile could not be taken lightly. Because if a nuclear missile had indeed been launched, it could, within a very short period of time, perhaps minutes, deliver up to 8 high-yield warheads toward Moscow or any part of Russia. Now, Russia had early warning satellites as well as radars that could see that no massive attack had been launched from the mainland United States. But that offered little comfort because even just one high-altitude blast, nuclear blast in the Arctic, above the Arctic, could blind Russian radars to a subsequent wave of attack. And that was a scenario that they had envisioned during the Cold War. So Russia's satellites and radars at this moment were designed to enable a so-called launch on warning posture. So that means Russia would be able to, in the ideal scenario, launch a retaliatory strike before enemy missiles would even hit. And that would ensure the maximum effectiveness of Russia's retaliation. But then by the time that the Soviet Union collapsed, this system of radars and satellites was not finished. And when Russian troops left the newly independent states of the Soviet Union, many radars were stranded in foreign territory. So as a result, there were serious gaps in Russia's ability through its early warning radars to detect launches, especially from the Atlantic and from the Pacific. There were radars that were left, for example, in newly independent Latvia that were demolished in 1995. The satellites frequently malfunctioned. They triggered false alarms of their own. And the first generation satellites that looked toward the Earth to track missile launches, they couldn't really detect submarine-launched ballistic missiles against the dark background of Earth's surface. And Russia's vulnerability at this moment was exacerbated by the United States deployment of Trident submarines with Trident II submarine-launched ballistic missiles. These were missiles that were more powerful and more accurate than the previous generation, so they could wipe out Moscow in a decapitating strike, right, wiping out the Russian leadership, or cripple Russia's nuclear forces on the ground preemptively. And this was a risk that the Russian leaders had to consider. Now, Russia's own command and control system was also not doing well. Equipment frequently malfunctioned, switched to combat mode for no apparent reason. The designers of the command and control equipment went on strike because the economic situation in Russia was so dire. The rocket forces couldn't pay for electricity and had to turn on emergency generators at its headquarters when its power was cut off. There were also copper thieves who would dig up copper cables from the ground, and that on multiple occasions disrupted communications at Russia's command and control nodes and networks. So this vulnerability, right, everything combined, tempted the Russian leaders to adopt a more vigilant nuclear posture. That meant because they were so vulnerable to a decapitating strike and to a preemptive strike, there was a time pressure. When they detected a strike, they would have been tempted to launch a retaliation as quickly as possible so as to avoid the risk of themselves being wiped out first. Now, fortunately, in 1995, this Black Brant 12 rocket that was launched from Norway didn't head toward Russia. It was very clear that it was headed toward the Arctic, and it eventually fell into the sea harmlessly. But even then, there were reports that Yeltsin had issued an order to Russia's nuclear forces to go on high alert. And the next day, Yeltsin told the world what had happened. According to him, he had taken out the black briefcase and tracked the flight of the missile from beginning to end, and had his finger on the alarm buttons. Now, after this incident, of course, Russian and Norwegian diplomats tried to enhance the communication procedure for early notification of missile launches, of rocket launches, civilian rocket launches, in order to prevent future incidents like this one. But then that didn't really solve all of the problems. That didn't resolve all the sources of risk, because miscommunication was just one out of many sources of risk, right? What if the rocket had strayed from its course and landed within Russian territory, right? What would that have looked like to Russia's radar operators? It would have looked like a missile, even if a notification had been issued. What if Russia's early warning system malfunctioned at that exact moment, as it did so many times during the 1990s? And what if that system had indicated a massive attack from the United States? Even if there had been a notification, even if everyone were aware, right, that would still create a very dangerous situation. Now, something that reduced risk at that moment was that Russia refrained from a posture of launching on warning. They did not launch when they detected what they thought was a missile. And of course, there was interpersonal trust between the Russian and US leaders. But today, with the Ukraine war, with Moscow's nuclear posture heading toward launch on warning, being more aggressive, with Russia's early warning radars under attack from Ukrainian drones in self-defense, new gaps are appearing in Russia's early warning capabilities. NATO-Russia relations are continuing to deteriorate. We don't know what hotlines remain effective or when and how the next false alert might be triggered. So we are living in a particularly dangerous moment. More states are adopting launch on warning postures, extended deterrence, meaning deterrence that covers one's allies. Artificial intelligence is bringing technological change to nuclear command and control and communication systems. So public awareness at this juncture is particularly important, because governments cannot be held accountable if the public does not understand the implications of these geopolitical and technological changes. So I want to end on something that Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, as well as UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Izumi Nakamitsu, what they have said on multiple occasions about the risk of nuclear war. And that is that we have been extraordinarily lucky so far to have avoided a nuclear war, but luck is not a strategy, and we cannot press our luck again. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions. I'll hand it over to our moderator or to Professor Lodgaard.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Yanliang. Your presentation powerfully reminded us that as long as we have nuclear weapon on Earth, we have to be constantly, we have to live side by side with the constant risk of accidental use of nuclear weapon. Thank you very much again, Yanliang. Now I'd like to invite Professor Lodgaard to give his keynote address. Professor Lodgaard, please unmute your mic. Oh, your camera was off.
I committed the standard error, forgetting about unmuting. Thank you very much.
I wonder if you could turn on your camera now. Now we can see you. Thank you very much.
Good. First of all, I would like to congratulate Yanliang on his excellent presentation and the incisive analysis you have made of the 1995 incident. I would like to start, though, with a couple of points which may be of greater interest to the students, but old news to you. First of all, I'm taking note of the fact that 80 years have passed without any war between the big powers. And so no wonder that people ask, how come? What can explain this? No war between the big powers. Historically, 80 years is a very long period of time. And of course, some people have looked for the new factor in the equation, the advent of nuclear weapons. Maybe nuclear weapons explain it, notably the nuclear deterrence. And that is an impression that has stayed with very many people up to this day. And of course, there has been a correlation between no war and nuclear weapons, which is not to say that there is a causal relationship. The relationship may be spurious, that is, it can be explained in reference to many other factors. And certainly, as Yanliang has reminded us so effectively, there have been many close calls, so close that some analysts tend to believe that we came out of it in a good fashion just because of good luck. Till this day, nobody can prove or disapprove the various hypotheses here about what caused that long period of 80 years, except by a catastrophic event that everybody wants to avoid. The second point, again in reference to the students, is about 1995. Yanliang talked about it, 5 years after the end of the Cold War. And this observation is that post-war periods are periods of opportunity when you can proceed with sort of proceed in a new way, for good or bad. And the American legendary political scientist Carl Deutsch used to talk about the periods of opportunity in informational terms. He said that when the ratio between current and background information is very high, you have those periods of opportunity. And the Cold War, the end of the Cold War, like the end of major wars, current information, that is a reference to what current says. It means that you rely on the ongoing flow of information real time. Background information is what you find in the archives, and major wars tend to render what you find in the archives largely irrelevant. So there isn't all that much you can rely on the basis of the archives. You have to go by the current flow of information. And then you can proceed, you may be able to continue in very many new directions, for good or bad. And after 1990, it was for good. In the first years after 1990, we got many arms control and disarmament agreements. Many wars in the Southern Hemisphere, especially, came to an end. And there were many other positive aspects too. The Security Council, for instance, for the first time after 1946, it functioned the way the Charter said that it should function. So the period of opportunity was used to good avail. But those periods are also known not to be long-lasting. And many historians would say that by 1995, the windows began to close. So in that sense, 1995, the year of the close call we are talking about, it was kind of a watershed year. But as Yanliang emphasized, relations between Russia and the United States were still good. Clinton had good relations with the Russian president. So there was nothing particularly bad about the atmosphere at this point in time. Going on to the Andøya event. Andøya, an island in northern Norway, 69 degrees latitude, 19 degrees longitude, means that this is a place situated in the high north and to the west. And Yanliang has mentioned the possible causes of the Russian misreading in the beginning of what this was about. The trajectory, the height, the speed, the form of the missile, the way the first and second stage was decoupled during flight. All of that had certain similarities with the Trident D5 missile. And we should also remember that Russia was in a real bad state of affairs at that time. Much was missing. Much was not quite the way it should be. And I follow Yanliang's analysis, but with one additional remark. Norwegian insiders at this time, they were not quite satisfied with the Russian explanation. President Yeltsin was on the election campaign trail when the event happened. He was actually in a meeting when he picked up the black box and opened it and was able to demonstrate to the participants that the commander-in-chief, the president, was in full charge. And later on, the chief of staff, the Russian chief of staff, weighed in and assured the public that the command chain remained effective, intact, functioned the way it should function. So those insiders, they do not quite buy the Russian story, the Russian narrative. And the factor that you mentioned, Yanliang, about the direction in which the missile was flying, direction north from northwestern Norway, direction north. It was supposed to land northeast of the Spitsbergen archipelago, which it did. It did not head towards Russia. That, in a sense, strengthens these doubts about the authenticity of the Russian presentation, the interpretation or presentation. I just wanted to mention that those Norwegian insiders I referred to never went public about their impressions. They didn't want to make any fuss about it. And there was a review of the notification procedure. I don't think much came out of that, but 2 years later, in 1997, there was a new launch pad for sounding missiles, much further north on the Spitsbergen Islands, at a place called New Ålesund. And from there, we could launch much smaller and much cheaper missiles and still connect about the same spectrum of information that could be collected by missiles launched from Andøya. So that was a major change. Fast forward here to today's situation at the Norwegian-Russian border. There are regular meetings at the border between representatives of the military forces. There are good military-to-military relations, communications between military leaders. Two, what is missing is a hotline between the top leaders with a view to de-escalation. And the Norwegian Chief of Staff has just asked about that and proposed that such a hotline be established. And I think he has a good case. She sent me some questions that I ought to address. A nuclear close call can happen unintentionally, of course, by human error, technical failure, misunderstandings, or it may happen intentionally, say for purposes of blackmail. I believe that the Cuban Missile Crisis also is a case in point here. To put it differently, close calls may happen for a reason. As part of a deliberate strategy. And that again is very much what we saw during the Cuban crisis. It was instigated intentionally. It was sort of a bold effort to squeeze something more out of the Americans, a concession enabling them to establish themselves with nuclear weapons on Cuba. So you have both of those types of close call, unintentional and intentional. I believe that we have many incidents today also which happen for a reason. For instance, right or wrong, I believe that China are sort of resorting to such events as a way of wielding power in the South China Sea. Incidents may not just pop up by accident, unintentionally, but it may be an integral part of broader strategies for wielding power for this or that. So are we in for more close calls? High tension, decreasing transparency, increasing unpredictability, and intensifying arms buildup is a toxic cocktail. And on top of that, we know that the United States, Russia, I believe China too, they are developing, already adopted by the way, nuclear warfighting doctrines, which means that the use of nuclear weapons become more thinkable and therefore also more likely to actually happen. more likely than used to be the case. To stem those tendencies, risk reduction and confidence building measures are, of course, of the essence. And these measures belong to the same continuum, stretching from instant conflict management at one end and long-term trust creation at the other end. And there are measures, some tested, tried and tested, and others, many others imaginable, all across that spectrum. I'm not just stating in that connection that we are in for more close calls, because this is a complex question when you begin to dig into it. But there are a lot of signs, at least, pointing in the direction that there may be many more in the future tough situations to deal with. Another question, how effective is a no first use policy in preventing close calls? No first use declarations, to be credible, they have to be reflected in the force postures. And we had a big debate about no first use in Europe in 1983. And at that time, the conclusion was that to be credible, a no first use declaration had to do something about tactical nuclear weapons. Tactical nuclear weapons, when deployed, as was the case at that time, very close to the east-west dividing line, they would be examples of weapons that would have to be used early or even first, not to be captured by the enemy or destroyed. So there had to be a disengagement along that line in order for no first use to be credible. Now today, this question is more complex, of course, because in multipolar and multi-domain settings, a proper answer to this question would have a global as well as a regional component. It is more difficult to say what it takes to make no first use credible. But this is a great question for further study. And that study has not been done yet. So I would hope that both Monterey and Toda could have a closer look at that in depth. What does it take for the big powers today to make credible no first use statements? I'll wind up on the fourth question, which is how can non-nuclear weapon states facilitate the resumption of dialogue? I'm going back to 1982 when the so-called Palme Commission, named after its chairman, the late Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme, that commission published a common security report. It said, in the nuclear age, security is not something we can build on our own unilaterally by rearmament. Security is something we have to build together with our adversary or adversaries. And they set out to propose a series of recommendations, practical recommendations to that effect. I believe that today we need another commission of that kind, which should preferably be proposed or would have to be proposed by non-nuclear weapon states. And I'm talking here about a commission composed of public figures who are known for their international leadership, for their international experience and insight into international security affairs. Broad insights. Specialists can always be called upon to contribute in their respective areas of expertise. I think that such a commission would also benefit from having the at least tacit support of their governments, I mean the commissioners. Tacit support at least of their governments at home. That would strengthen their legitimacy. And the commission could also simultaneously help build bridges across deep dividing lines. They are too deep these days. We are in dire need of better communications between the major antagonists on the international scene. And this commission could make a change for the better in that respect. On that note, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion with the students.
Thank you very much, Professor Lodgaard, for your keynote. You have built upon Yanliang's presentation, and that really helped us to understand the discussion deeper. And thank you very much for responding all the questions from our end. And then I feel so encouraged to hear your expectation towards work, especially focusing on no first use. I believe that is exactly what Toda Institute is planning to do.
Yeah.
So thank you again for your wonderful, informative presentation, keynote speech. So we will now would like to move into our Q&A. Thank you all for the excellent questions already coming through. The first question is, this is something that is related to part of Professor Lodgaard remarks, but the first question is this, how can the global community engage national leaders to effectively dismantle the logic of nuclear deterrence, and how let all the national leaders to engage more dialogue and then trust building? Would Professor Lodgaard, would you like to take that question?
The Ban Treaty set out to do that, and the Ban Treaty has empowered countries, first of all, I would say in the South, but also some others, to take braver action in this respect, to lean on the world powers to remember their humanity, as the Russell Einstein manifesto said, remember your humanity and forget the rest. And that initiative, however commendable, it has become controversial, as we know, not least in the NPT context. But I think the Ban Treaty and the NPT are complementary documents. They ought to be mutually supportive. And looking at what has happened at the Ban Treaty conferences, I have noted no intervention which is trying to degrade the NPT. So from that side, cooperation, but from the other side, that cooperation is missing. But then public opinion is often strongest when the international security situation becomes particularly difficult. And today we have the nuclear sharing discussions going on. And that is creating quite a bit of interest again in nuclear weapons issues I can speak for Europe, but also in other parts of the world. So that is an occasion, I think, to explain to people what the nuclear umbrellas are about, what they are and what they are not. If interested, I could, as Chia knows, elaborate a bit on that. But use that opportunity, that revived interest in nuclear weapons issues to move governments in a different direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to go on to the next question. That is a bit maybe a personal question to both of Professor Lodgaard and Yanliang. The question is, if you have any example of short-term solutions and a fundamental solution or vision of the ideal approach going forward, we would appreciate hearing your thought. The solution for the nuclear issue, I guess.
I have a brief answer, sort of animated by the topic of today. And it seems to me, reviewing arms control history and the situation today, that what can be achieved in the near-term future, the agenda for the near-term future would be of a behavioral kind. I'm talking now again about confidence building and risk reduction. And my point being that this is, well, still it is very difficult to move ahead, to get results, but proposals for reductions of arsenals and rearrangement of nuclear postures, that's even more difficult. So I would like to make that case for measures to reduce risks and for enhanced cooperation between the different sides of current divides. To get going on sort of any sensible measure, the parties must be willing to talk to each other. And in Europe, as between Europe and Russia, the situation is worse today than during the Cold War. So there is much space for improvement.
Thank you so much. Yanliang, would you like to answer that question as well?
Yes, I would just add that it would help a great deal if we could simply ask the great powers to return to international law. Because a lot of insecurity has been created by violations of international law, both by Russia and Ukraine, more recently, by the United States. And when non-nuclear weapon states experience this kind of insecurity, of course, the temptation for them to proliferate horizontally goes up. But when weaker nuclear weapon states face nuclear modernization or nuclear arsenal expansion from the more powerful ones, they, of course, face the temptation to proliferate vertically. And fundamentally, even if we return to, let's say, arms control treaties, if the norm becomes neglecting international law, neglecting the sanctity of treaties in the first place, then no treaty will make sense. No treaty will be as meaningful as the arms control treaties of the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s were. And so that's what I would say is the first step, is just restoring the sanctity of rules in the international system.
Thank you very much for a very clear answer. We also receive a question. If, Yanliang, you share the case of Norwegian rocket incident, this participant wants to know if there are other cases of nuclear close calls. If both of you, if you would like to take that answer, please go ahead.
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, there are so many, and this is the Norwegian story is the first of a long series of stories that we hope to produce, reflecting, reconstructing real historical events. I'll just name a few of them. I mean, there were quite a few during the days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So just that one crisis would make for probably 2 or 3 nuclear close calls, major ones. And then there were malfunctions associated with the United States NORAD early warning system, warning of a fake Soviet attack that never was launched by the Soviet Union due to the failure of a microchip or due to other sort of mechanical failures in the system. And then there were instances when nuclear weapons went missing, a whole lot of them. So, I mean, one could go on and on, but I'll hand it over to Professor Lodgaard.
Thank you, Yanliang. Professor Lodgaard, would you like to respond to that question? If there, you know that the other case of nuclear close call, other than Norwegian rocket incident. I think you're muted. Oh, now it works.
No.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh,
Yes.
the technology shows I'm muted, but glad to hear that the message is wrong. I thought Yanliang's answer is a good answer. And likewise, I used the occasion to underline the same thing about international law. Today, we see that very much of it is the law of the jungle. It's the harshest attack on international law that I have seen in my lifetime. So we should do our level best to emphasize the virtues of international law. If we mean anything, serious about international order, the order has to be based at the very least on international law and on much else as well.
Thank you very much. The next question is a bit technical, but can it be justified to destruct nuclear facilities when it is obvious that a country is developing nuclear weapons? Should we support the military action of certain country that is, trying to destroy those nuclear weapon facility or so on?
We should certainly not support that. We should act in compliance with international law, which forbids such action. One of the worst atrocities that international law knows is war of aggression and the bombing of the nuclear facilities of another country would be such a case also. But in the international law part, there are also other reasons why we should not try to go by that standard, bombing what we do not like. And this is that, as illustrated, of course, by the case of Iran these days, you can destroy the nuclear facilities, and that has been done. But you cannot bomb the knowledge of how to produce weapons materials and how to build weapons. So that will always remain. And there are doubts around here and there that saying that even if we bomb, it wouldn't help in the long run, and it might even be counterproductive, making the object of bombing even more insistent on going ahead and produce their own nuclear weapons. So for many reasons, we should say a flat no to such ideas.
Thank you very much. That's very clear answer, and I think we all support your response. And then I think this question is from a parent of high school student daughter. In their family, they are learning for how we can abolish the nuclear weapon, and then this parents thinks it is very important to raise awareness about the nuclear weapon and a peace among younger generation. And then these parents want to know what is the most effective way to learn together and raise awareness between among young people. I think Professor Lodgaard and Yanliang both engage in education, especially for young people. So maybe both, would you like to respond to that question?
Peace education. Education in this realm is probably more important than in a long while. Now, people also learn through information flows, and that can be very effective. But there are big dangers because of all the disinformation around these days. The world is not what it seems to be. I'm reverting to Einstein and Russell. And in my lifetime, I have learned the hard lessons in that respect. I was in Stockholm at SIPRI in the 1980s when the Swedes were hunting submarines in the Swedish archipelago. And they pointed at the Soviets at the time. The Soviet Union was responsible for the deep intrusions into Swedish waters. And I believed it too. And then a number of years later, it became clear that this had been a US-UK deception operation. That made a very strong impression on me. And I have always been sort of alert to possible misreadings, not buying in automatically on all the stories that I hear. And today, there is well-founded information, and there is just deception and disinformation in a veritable mix. So we ought to be able to give seriously interested people some advice as to public sources, which sources are better than others, and to make it clear to everybody that the information flow from day to day, it has to be read and used with care.
Thank you very much for emphasizing the importance of peace education and how we need to deal with information. Thank you so much. Yanliang, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would just add that in my observation, the field of disarmament or non-proliferation, it's on the one hand quite narrow in the sense that its purpose is singularly directed at least in the nuclear domain, getting rid of nuclear weapons or preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. But on the other hand, it's incredibly broad in terms of the talent that is needed to make that happen, right? So in nuclear disarmament, for example, we not only need to understand the technicalities, we need nuclear engineers, we need aerospace engineers to understand the missiles, we need lawyers to understand the treaties, to craft the treaties. We need international relations experts. We need people who understand languages and cultures. And for projects like the graphic story, we need artists, right? So I don't think peace education should exist apart from what people are interested in doing with their lives. I don't think it should be a distraction or something that they feel obligated to do apart from what they feel passionate about. I think it should be part and parcel of what people are pursuing in their life, right? Regardless of what people are pursuing, I think there is always a connection, organic connection between that and peace.
Thank you very much, Yanliang. I think it's really encouraging message that everyone can engage in any way that we can towards the abolishing nuclear weapon. Unfortunately, we only have time for one last question. The last question is that, as you probably are aware, it's about the situation in Japan. As I mentioned, that Japan is the only country that have suffered by the atomic bombing in a war. And 15 years ago, we also witnessed Fukushima nuclear accident. But however, in recent years, there are bit of discussion towards Japan to the possibility of Japan to have the nuclear sharing and nuclear possession. It's really alarming. And then this participant want to know if there are any example where public campaign have helped stop a war or those kind of conflict. Could you share those episodes or the stories?
There is a classical example that goes back to the period around 1960. Public opinion played a major role in stopping atmospheric testing. And the impact of the Palme Commission report in the 1980s, it was strong in Europe, among European leaders, less so with the Americans. But when Gorbachev and Reagan met in Reykjavik Island, he used the Palme Commission message of common security to great effect at that meeting. He was sort of seized of the messages in that commission. So expert work can also have a great public impact. But Linus Pauling and others did it very well around 1960. The paradox is that public opinion tends to be strongest when very little can be done. And when things move into calmer waters and things can be achieved, public opinion tends to taper off. So how to deal with that is another of the biggies that we need to reflect on.
Thank you so much. Yanliang, would you like to respond?
I think I only have counterexamples in mind at the moment. I think the counterexample is that when countries treat nuclear weapons as a holy shield, as is the rhetoric in some countries, or uncritically consider the history of nuclear weapon development and armament development as a history that is characterized by heroism, that is counterproductive to disarmament.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. That's really helpful to understand. There are some examples and both positive and negative. Thank you very much. And I thank you everyone for such engaging in informative sessions. Your contribution have truly brought this discussion to life. To conclude our program, I'd like to invite Tomohiko Aishima, Chair of Soka Gakkai Peace Committee, to offer closing remarks.
Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today for the online event, Nuclear Close Call. First and foremost, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Dr. Sverre Lodgaard for his keynote speech and rich insight, and to Mr. Yanliang Pan for his valuable case presentation. I would also like to extend our appreciation to our co-organizers at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies and the Toda Peace Institute and their welcome remarks. Thank you so much, Stein and Masako. The discussion today clearly highlighted what we must learn from the 1995 Norwegian Rocket Incident, which was an extremely close call. The fact that a single misperception, a failure in communication, and the vulnerability of an early warning system could have pushed the world into nuclear devastation is a lesson that must never be forgotten. From this instance of a nuclear close call, we have reconfirmed how unstable the system surrounding nuclear weapons is and how easily it can collapse due to minor factors such as human error or system malfunction. I would like to take this opportunity to re-emphasize the myth of nuclear deterrence. As this incident proves, the belief that the mere existence of nuclear weapons maintains peace is built upon an extremely dangerous illusion. In an age where the risk of accidental nuclear war is escalating, we must adopt the firm stance that nuclear weapons do not offer safety, but rather pose the greatest threat to the entire humanity and environment. Moreover, this is not merely a distant issue. The theme of today, nuclear close call, has a history of actually occurring right here on our doorstep in Okinawa. In 1962, amidst the Cuban missile crisis, a launch control center for the Mace B nuclear missile deployed at a US military base in Okinawa mistakenly issued a launch order for a nuclear missile. Fortunately, the worst case scenario, the launch of a nuclear missile, was narrowly averted by the calm and wise judgment of the launch officer in charge. However, this fact presents a stark challenge to all of us living today. Accidental factors such as system malfunctions and human judgment error could easily drag the world into nuclear war. We, Soka Gakkai, regard the abolition of nuclear weapons as the most critical issue concerning humanity's right to existence. Through dialogue and education, we have been working to expand solidarity within civil society. We are determined to continue our persistent and concrete actions to eradicate the absolute evil of nuclear weapons from the world, always from the perspective of human security that protects the dignity of every single life. I sincerely hope that the lessons you have taken home today and your passion for peace will be transmitted from one person to another, transforming minds, changing actions, and ultimately reshaping the future. Thank you very much for your participation today.
Thank you very much. And before closing, I'd like to take a group photo on this screen. So if you feel comfortable, please turn on your camera so that we can take a screenshot. And we're taking photos. If you don't want to be included in a photo, please turn off your camera. Could you wait for a moment? Yeah. Please smile for the photo. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your cooperation. And with that, we would like to conclude today's event. We have sent the survey link to your chat. We would really appreciate it if you could take a moment to share your thought and your feedback. Thank you very much. Thank you all once again for your time, your focus, and your participation. And special thanks for our amazing translator. Thank you very much. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful morning, wonderful day, and wonderful evening. Thank you very much.